Hello, and welcome to First Chapter Reads, the podcast where I read the first chapter of an indie book, and I hope that you might just find your next favorite author. I'm going to start off with an apology today. So, I was supposed to read this book, the chapter of this book, upon its launch a couple of months ago, and I have been extremely busy, mostly running around after a 3-year-old, and I just haven't managed to get this recorded. So I am getting it recorded today, and the book is The Crimson Fire from Abel Montero. Now, Abel is Italian, and this is a book he's translated himself. He originally wrote in Italian, translated into English. I'm a big fan of translated books, and there's something about them, and this might be my Hiberno English, that kind of enjoy when something is a little bit different than your normal English speaking book, and the translations usually do that. Sometimes almost simpler use of language, especially come from certain languages. I wouldn't say that about Abel in particular. Crimson Fire has a lot of beautiful poetic prose, and I guess coming from one of the romantic languages that comes through in this book. Um, so let's start. Chapter 1, Crimson Fire by Abel Montero. Eshvin watched the horizon and wondered how many people he would kill after sunset. He hoped they would be armed, men and women aware of their crimes, of their treachery. It would be easier that way. But even if they did not brandish swords or daggers, they would be judged guilty. It was about justice, only justice. Great sweeps of cloud covered the sky, forming a shield between the slowly darkening vault and the expanse of the sea. Even the last glimpse of the sun would soon disappear over the horizon, engulfed by the ever thickening mantle, and now the shallow waves seemed darker and darker. Ishvan ran his eyes all over the water as he rested his hands on the wooden handrail, fighting not to get seasick. He hated boats, from the smallest to those capable of carrying huge cargoes, but he would not let himself be whipped or accept being thrown overboard with his wrists bound as long as he did not complain, as long as he could do the job he was given. For what he did was important. His actions would soon change Kenjir forever. To his left, the auxiliary side. His name was Sidio. He was almost as tall as Eshvin, with darker skin that matched most of those he'd met since arriving in Kenjir. His long black hair framed a face full of restless energy. He constantly shifted his weight from one foot to the other, a habit that bordered on the unbearable. The wind is rising. The sea may swell. If we don't move now, it will be impossible to reach the island in time. Sidio said in a voice burdened with anxiety and perhaps even fear. Eshvin turned to look at the city behind them. Evron, with a strip of city lights, shone brightly along the coast, and then at the top of the immense rocky ridge, there stood the House of Wisdom, home of the oldest academy devoted to the literature and history of Kenjir. In the opposite direction lay the island of Lena, their destination. There the merchants guarded the precious objects he and his auxiliaries had been sent to retrieve. Some might call it theft, but of course they didn't know the truth. Eshvin nodded. Where is Mali? She's keeping an eye on the captain and his son. Good. Eshvin did not like the owner of the fishing boat. The man reeked of cheap wine, and his son, the only other person on the boat besides Eshvin, Sidio, and Mali, seemed terrified at the thought of disobeying him. Men who ruled by fear and beatings were always the least reliable. Eshvin kept that thought to himself and tried to concentrate on the mission. He loosened his grip on the railing, turned to the back of the boat, and saw the captain fiddling with the oar as his son dropped anchor. Mally stood a few paces away from the men, watching them in silence with her arms crossed. As he approached the three, Eshvin felt the boat sway more and then settle. The captain locked the helm and walked over to a wooden crate on his right. From it he took out a map, which he unrolled directly on the lid of the container. The merchants know how to protect their island. No ship docks without their permission. Hell, it's risky to even approach the island without alerting them, he said with a mixture of amazement and admiration, pointing to a series of concentric circles that surrounded the image of the island of Lena. He tapped his finger on the circles. There are dozens of ships that sail these routes around the island non-stop. Even at night, we can't get any closer. Eshvin caught the excuse hidden between the words. We are close enough. All three of us are strong swimmers, he said, and he wasn't exaggerating. He, Sidio, and Mally had trained rigorously for months, mastering the art of swimming faster and longer than any other member of the order. Eshvin was proud of this accomplishment, but remained vigilant, knowing that even the slightest mistake could jeopardize their mission. Successfully evading the patrol ships would be a monumental feat. What about the harpoons? Mally asked in a flat voice. The auxiliary still had her muscular arms across her chest and clenched her jaw, accentuating the angular features of her face. Here, closer to the island, Captain pointed. Eshvin let out an anxious sigh as he thought of what this additional marking on the map represented. Sacred artifacts. The product of the power of the masters, the beings who walked among men and ruled them as gods. The harpoon could pierce any ship from one side to the other and cut down every threat from the sea, an extraordinary deterrent that had cemented the position of the Covenant Guild and its dominance over trade in Kenjir. In theory, such weapons were the exclusive property of the masters and their armies. How the Guild merchants had managed to secure them remained a mystery. But that was just one of the many secrets that surrounded the masters and the way they decided to rule Kenjir. We'd better get ready right away then, Sidio said as he flanked Eshvin's left side. From a pocket in his trousers, he pulled out three thin chains of polished iron. The links that formed the chain were so small and so delicately forged that they looked almost like silver hairs. Eshvin took one as did Mally. Sidio was already wearing his. Each necklace had a pendant, an opaque black pearl the size of a grape. They look fragile, Mally said. Are we sure they will hold the passage? It was the captain who answered her. All the guild warriors who guard these waters wear one. If you wear them around your neck, the harpoons will not be activated. Try to handle them carefully, he said in a solemn, dark tone, as if the mere mention of the harpoons brought images of pure horror to his mind. Sidio stroked the necklace and pendant as if they would suddenly crumble between his fingers. Perhaps he was imagining what would happen if one of those darts struck him. They were said to be forged from lithinium, the metal of the masters, as long as a small boat and as thick as an arm. They were fired from huge underwater crossbows. The force of the impact would be enough to shear a man in two, his entrails exploding and scattering in the water. Eshvin chased away the image of Sidio and Mally, reduced to mush. Let's dive in. Both nodded and approached the side. Before jumping into the water, they checked each other's uniforms. They wore tight-fitting breeches and tunics made of a thin black fabric stolen from a Tudor military outpost, a largely unknown material capable of retaining body heat and keeping the skin reasonably dry even in these cold waters. Your contact is ready, I suppose, Eshvin said, keeping the corner of his right eye on them and the rest of his attention on the captain. The man hastened to agree. Look for this sign on the pier facing the peaks, he said, unfastening the collar of his tunic. He showed him a tattoo on his chest of a stylized plane. It will be engraved on the wood, away from prying eyes. Good. Eshvin put on the necklace and hid it under the tight fabric of his tunic, then let Sidio and Mally walk around him to check his uniform. They nodded shortly after waiting for his orders. Eshvin took one last look at the captain and his son, who stood a few steps behind them. The boy looked at him as if he had been a ghost of the night, one of those that haunted children's dreams. If you are not here when I return, my brothers will use your skin to make boots, and they will carve your bones. They would make good spoons, he hissed. Captain and his son nodded quickly. We are men of our word, my lord, men of our word, you shall see. Eshvin watched them in silence. Then he turned his back and nodded to Sidio and Molly. With a few firm steps and an elegant leap, they dove over the side of the fishing boat. The water greeted him, cold and clear. The clouds thickened. Eshvin had waited weeks for an evening like this, a combination that was hard to come by. For the mission to succeed, he needed cloudy skies, yes, but not so cloudy as to threaten a storm, and he needed the little natural light of a sunset, but not the pitch black of a moonless night. That was why the wait for overcast skies had taken so long. Just when he was beginning to lose hope, here was the perfect evening. It had been a new, very strong confirmation of how foolish it was to doubt the power of his Lord. The As he swam with long, steady strokes, followed closely by Malian, then Sidio, Eshvin silently implored the waves and currents to stay calm. Every 3 strokes his face would appear. He would open his mouth to breathe and glance at Mali and Sidio. The 2 auxiliaries kept up the pace tenaciously. They swam in clean strokes, very little splash, even from the churning of their legs. The fabric they wore helped make the crossing smoother and even less noisy. It was an amazing invention. Too bad it had come from the minds of false gods. They had also calculated the timing and memorized the intervals between the 2 lines of defence. So shortly after Ashford slowed his pace to almost a halt, he allowed himself to quietly observe the vastness of the sea and catch his breath. As soon as he heard the breathing of Mali and Sidio, he asked, Are you with me? Always, replied Sidio, stuttering a little. The young man was out of breath, his words muffled by water. Perhaps he had swallowed some. Mali instead sounded calm as always. Yes, my lord. She shook her head sharply to move a few strands of the short brown hair that fell across her forehead. Eshvin caught a movement not far to the right and immediately recognized the silhouette of a guard ship. The patrol was close, only a few more minutes. There was still some natural light, but the men on board had lit the lamp that projected an ominous beam that illuminated the sea around the boat in circular motions. The lamp was probably placed in the centre of the ship and operated by at least 2 warriors. It created a wide, cold patch of light in the water. Eshvin and his brethren did not know for sure what powered this kind of equipment, but it was not hard to imagine that it was based on the arts of the masters. There is no time to go far enough. We have to dive. Mali nodded. Sidio was wide-eyed and breathing too fast. Eshvin stared into his eyes. Look at me, look at me. The young man blinked quickly, struggling to hold his gaze. You are ready like me and Mali. You can do this. You are ready. Stay close to me. Do you understand me? Sidio nodded. I will count to 3, and then we will dive. We go head first, as if to pick up the most spectacular ring ever forged. I'll stop you. You try to stay close to me and wait, all right? Yes, Missionary Eshvin, they whispered in unison. Eshvin looked at Sidio and then at Mali. His face was determined and ready. He prayed that his confidence would burn into their souls like wood to feed the fire of their faith. He counted slowly, then he dove into the water. He continued to move his arms slowly, stretching his legs as if they were walking on a cloud to keep himself upright. Silence, made up of vibrations that shook his chest, moved up his neck. The world of water enveloped him and crushed him without hesitation. It flowed around him like a sleepy beast awakened by large insects. Eshvin focused on Mali to his right and Sidio to his left. There was much less light down there, and he could barely see them. Sidio was a problem. During training, he had a hard time tolerating the semi-darkness, even if he could hold his breath long enough. Fear often got the better of him. His performance had improved in the last few days, but in those moments Eshvin wondered if he was asking too much of such a young auxiliary. Where was the guard ship? Eshvin watched the surface above. From his perspective, he felt as if he were flying. It was as if he were suspended in mid-air beneath a giant mirror, worn and blackened by time. There it was. The surface of the sea rippled, disturbed by the oars, and the almond-shaped silhouette of the boat moved about above them with the light that seemed to set the waves on fire. It was powerful and eye of fire that created a very brilliant stain on the water. How deep could it go? The beam moved with exasperating slowness. It was close, close, close. Sidio was shaken by a convulsion. Then another and another. Small eruptions of bubbles escaped from his mouth as he projected upward, but he was getting too agitated. Reaching the surface seemed impossible, and even if he did, the guild warriors would easily catch him. Eshvin pushed toward him and grabbed his leg. In the slanting beams of light from the boat, Sidio's eyes, wide with panic, met his. All three knew what it meant, that the life of an auxiliary was less important than the mission. The guard ship high above them was loaded with men who would pierce them without a second thought, and he had no intention of wasting all the work he had done so far. Mally, however, surprised him. She rose to face Sidio, wrapped her legs around his waist, and then took his face in her hands. She placed her lips on his and pumped air into his lungs. She was taking a huge risk, on the verge of sacrificing herself for a comrade far less gifted than herself. Ishvan shook his head, fighting not to give in to anger. If he let himself get carried away, it would become impossible to hold on. And anyway, this time was running out. His chest burned and his heart pounded louder and louder in his ears. The guardship was moving away. He calculated that if they started swimming up immediately, they would be able to surface, catch their breath, and return underwater to hide at a relatively safe distance. Perhaps, but in truth the guild's men were more than capable of spotting them immediately. The mission could fail at any moment. Eshvin nodded to Mally and gave Sidio a tug before swimming to the surface. Just before reaching the water's edge, he had to pull Mally out from under an armpit and hold her up to keep her from swallowing water as she struggled to stay afloat. Easy, easy, he hissed at her. He helped her by wrapping a hand around her chest and forcing her to float on her back with him. Calm down. We made it. Just breathe. She coughed again, but recovered almost immediately. Eshvin searched for the guardship and the lamp. He found it to the left. It was moving away quickly, but the beam of light was still more than capable of intercepting them. What had happened to Sidio? The beam is coming back, the young man warned. Eshvin saw him no more than 3 or 4 strokes away from them. He released Mally's grip and ordered, "We must dive again. Are you with me?" "As always, my lord," she replied. Her voice was hoarse, and she struggled to control her breathing. Sidio nodded and answered him in a hushed voice. Eshvin wanted to scold them both, or strangle them, or all of the above. Maybe when the mission was over, on the count of 3. So that is The Crimson Fire from Abel Montero. Uh, Very enjoyable fantasy read. Beautiful prose in that book, as you heard there. And if you would like to continue reading that, I will leave a link in the bio down below. I hope you enjoyed that, and I will hopefully see you all soon. I have some very exciting books to read, books I've really enjoyed, and I think you will too. I have two more fantasy books to do in the next while, so hopefully I'll get them done and see you guys soon. Thanks so much for listening. Take care.